January 30th, 1943, 11 o'clock in the morning. Berlin, Germany. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring took his place at the lectern inside the Reich Broadcasting House, ready to broadcast his anniversary speech to the nation. A full decade had passed since Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party seized control of Germany. The transmission was live. The entire country was listening intently. Then something happened that would change everything. Air raid sirens began their piercing wail across the Berlin skyline. High above the German capital, at an altitude of 25,000 feet, 3 wooden aircraft were closing in on their target. They were about to deliver a humiliation to the second most powerful figure in Nazi Germany, and they would do it with planes built from materials Hitler's regime had declared impossible. These weren't the lumbering metal bombers that German fighter pilots could intercept and shoot down. These were de Havilland Mosquitoes, constructed primarily from plywood and balsa wood, capable of speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour. To Hermann Göring, commanding the entire Luftwaffe, this moment would become a consuming obsession that would demand German aviation resources for years to come. The Mosquito represented a fundamental contradiction to everything Nazi ideology preached about technological superiority. A wooden aircraft manufactured by what Germany dismissed as a decadent democracy was outperforming every fighter and bomber the Reich had managed to produce. What unfolded next would set off the most expensive and desperate attempt at technological imitation in Luftwaffe history. A frantic race to copy what German engineers had insisted was scientifically impossible. A program that would ultimately fail catastrophically, not destroyed by enemy action, but by the very industrial and material limitations the Mosquito had been specifically designed to overcome. Germany's attempt to replicate this wooden wonder would become a stark lesson in how ideology combined with desperation and resource scarcity could transform innovation into disaster. The bombs struck Berlin at exactly 11 in the morning. Göring's speech was interrupted mid-sentence. For more than an hour, panic and confusion swept through the broadcasting station as technicians fought to restore the transmission. When Göring finally managed to speak again, those who witnessed him described a man consumed by rage and humiliation. His famous boast from September 1939 now rang mockingly in everyone's memory. "No enemy bomber can reach the Ruhr," he had declared with absolute certainty. "If one reaches the Ruhr, my name is not Göring. You may call me Meyer." Now enemy bombers had struck the heart of Berlin itself in broad daylight on the most sacred date in the Nazi calendar, and they had accomplished it using wooden aircraft. 6 Mosquitoes participated in the raid that morning. 3 aircraft from 105 Squadron attacked first, striking early in the day. 3 more from 139 Squadron followed in the afternoon, deliberately timed to disrupt a propaganda speech by Minister Joseph Goebbels. 5 of the attackers returned safely to their bases across the Channel. 1 Mosquito from 139 Squadron, piloted by Squadron Leader Darling and Flying Officer Wright, fell to anti-aircraft fire. Both men were killed instantly. Their loss proved that even the remarkable Mosquito could be brought down, yet the casualty rate remained extraordinary by any measure. Not a single German fighter had managed to intercept any of the attacking aircraft. By this point in January 1943, the Mosquito had flown over 600 operational missions against German targets. The loss rate stayed below 1%, a figure that was extraordinary by any standard. Compare that to the aircraft the Royal Air Force sent regularly. Their conventional bombers suffered losses exceeding 5%. The mathematics were absolutely devastating for German morale and confidence. A wooden airplane, which Nazi propaganda had repeatedly claimed represented British desperation and inferiority in technology, was proving nearly impossible to shoot down. Geoffrey de Havilland had begun developing this concept back in 1938. His radical vision contradicted every accepted principle of modern aircraft design. While metal construction dominated aviation everywhere, de Havilland proposed building a bomber entirely from wood. The aircraft would carry no defensive guns, no armor plating, no self-sealing fuel tanks, just raw speed, extreme altitude capability, and the structural efficiency that composite wood construction could provide. The British Air Ministry initially rejected the concept as ridiculous and unworkable. How could wood possibly compete with metal? How could an unarmed bomber possibly survive in combat? The answers resided in mathematics and engineering principles that German engineers would later struggle desperately to understand and replicate. De Havilland had already pioneered wooden aircraft construction with the DH-88 Comet Racer back in 1934. 3 Comets entered the famous London to Melbourne air race. One aircraft covered 11,000 miles in just 71 hours. The Comet's construction used multiple layers of plywood and balsa wood, bonded together with adhesive, creating a stressed skin monocoque structure. This sandwich construction delivered strength equivalent to metal while weighing only half as much. De Havilland refined and perfected this technique with the DH-91 Albatross airliner, which flew in 1937. The Albatross carried 22 passengers at speeds of 210 miles per hour, faster than most contemporary bombers. When war erupted in September 1939, de Havilland recognized that aluminum would become increasingly scarce. Britain needed to expand aircraft production at an unprecedented rate. Wood offered an elegant solution. Furniture factories, piano manufacturers, boat builders all possessed the necessary skills to work with wood. These craftsmen could never have built metal aircraft, but they could absolutely build wooden ones. On March 1, 1940, the Air Ministry issued specification B1-40. An initial order for 50 bomber and reconnaissance variants of the DH-98 was approved. The prototype carried the designation W4050. On November 25, 1940, Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. took the prototype aloft from Hatfield Aerodrome. The flight lasted 30 minutes. Every expectation was exceeded. The Mosquito prototype, painted in bright yellow for visibility, displayed handling characteristics that pilots described as almost fighter-like, despite its considerable size. The first operational reconnaissance mission occurred on September 17, 1941, when a photo reconnaissance Mosquito flew over France gathering intelligence. On January 16, 1942, the prototype competed directly against a Spitfire in comparative flight trials. The Mosquito, a twin-engine bomber that weighed twice what a Spitfire weighed, flew a full 20 miles per hour faster. The Mosquito achieved 488 miles per hour at 22,000 feet. German intelligence officers reviewing these reported figures assumed they were deliberate propaganda fabrications designed to impress the Allies. No twin-engine aircraft carrying bombs could possibly outrun single-engine fighters. Yet the Mosquito did exactly that, contradicting everything German aeronautical knowledge accepted as truth. The secret lay in the power-to-weight ratio. 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, each generating over 1,500 horsepower, drove the Mosquito's remarkably lightweight wooden airframe. The entire aircraft structure weighed approximately 14,300 pounds empty. A comparable metal bomber would weigh substantially more. The wooden construction provided enormous weight savings while maintaining structural integrity, translating directly into speed and altitude performance that far exceeded anything Germany possessed or could build. The manufacturing method was genuinely revolutionary. The fuselage was built in 2 halves, each constructed on massive concrete molds. Workers carefully laid strips of birch plywood inside the molds, followed by a layer of Ecuadorian balsa wood, then more birch plywood. The layers were bonded with casein adhesive, a glue derived from milk proteins. Once the adhesive fully cured, workers joined the 2 fuselage halves along the center line. The wings employed an identical sandwich construction approach. Douglas fir and spruce spars formed the structural backbone, with English ash forming the wing ribs and tension strips. Birch plywood and balsa created the wing skins, with walnut reinforcing critical structural bulkheads. The entire wing was constructed as one complete piece, requiring absolutely no rivets or fasteners. This construction method offered advantages that German engineers would later fail to appreciate and understand. Wood provided remarkable damage resistance. Bullets passed through wooden structures without shattering them, unlike aluminum, which cracked and peeled away. Wood did not generate radar returns as efficiently as metal, making the Mosquito harder for radar to detect. Wood could be repaired in the field using only basic tools and materials available anywhere. Most crucially, wood eliminated the dependence on strategic metals that Germany desperately lacked. By summer 1942, Mosquitoes were operational in multiple roles. Photo reconnaissance variants flew over Germany at 40,000 feet, well above the ceiling of German fighters. Bomber variants struck precise targets while suffering minimal losses. Fighter-bomber variants, armed with 4 20mm cannons and 4 303 caliber machine guns, proved devastatingly effective against German shipping and ground installations. Night fighter variants, equipped with airborne intercept radar, downed German bombers patrolling over England. The sheer versatility shocked German intelligence analysts. A single basic airframe fulfilled roles that required entirely different aircraft designs throughout the Luftwaffe. The Mosquito could carry a 4,000-pound bomb load farther than most dedicated bombers. It could fight like a pure fighter, despite carrying bombs. It could conduct reconnaissance missions lasting 8 hours without refueling. It could launch rockets against armored vehicles and fixed installations. 42 distinct variants entered service before the war ended. Production expanded rapidly throughout the war years. De Havilland's factory at Hatfield built the initial prototypes, then manufacturing dispersed to furniture makers across Britain. By 1943, companies that had previously built dining tables and pianos were assembling complete Mosquito fuselages. The workforce included women, older men beyond military age, and skilled craftsmen who could never have worked with metal aircraft. Nearly 8,000 Mosquitoes were built in Britain, Canada, and Australia by war's end. The operational record continued building steadily through 1942. Mosquitoes bombed Gestapo headquarters in Oslo in September, destroying records of resistance members. They struck precision targets across occupied Europe while suffering casualty rates below 1%. By late 1942, German night fighter crews began reporting something deeply troubling. British aircraft they could not catch were conducting reconnaissance missions across Germany with complete impunity. Reconnaissance Mosquitoes, stripped of all unnecessary equipment and carrying only cameras, achieved speeds of 420 miles per hour at altitude. German fighters climbing to intercept found only empty sky. Mosquito pilots could see German fighters launching from bases below and simply accelerated away. By the time German fighters reached operational altitude, the Mosquito was already 100 miles distant. For Luftwaffe pilots trained to believe in German technical superiority, the experience produced a dangerous psychological effect. If they could not catch a wooden British bomber, what did that say about German aircraft design and German engineering? The crisis escalated through early 1943. Mosquitoes began appearing over Berlin regularly, conducting what the British called nuisance raids. Small formations, sometimes just 2 or 3 aircraft, struck at irregular intervals both day and night. They disrupted manufacturing operations, prevented workers from sleeping, forced constant readiness that exhausted the defenders. German fighters scrambled repeatedly, burning precious fuel, achieving absolutely nothing. Anti-aircraft batteries fired thousands upon thousands of rounds, hitting nothing but air. The Mosquito flew too high, too fast, and too unpredictably for 1943 technology to intercept. Hermann Göring became obsessed with the situation. At conferences with aviation ministry officials, he demanded explanations. How could the British build wooden aircraft superior to German metal designs? The answers he received contradicted Nazi ideology at every level. British engineers were not inferior to German ones. British industrial organization was not chaotic and disorganized. British material science was not lagging behind German standards. The Mosquito existed because Britain had solved problems Germany had not even recognized as problems. On March 18, 1943, Göring summoned Germany's aviation industry leaders to Carinhall, his vast hunting estate in the forest. For 6 hours he berated them. A stenographer recorded every word, creating a historical document revealing the depth of German frustration. Göring directed particular fury toward the Mosquito's wooden construction. "I go mad when I look at the Mosquito," he raged at them. "I am green and yellow with envy. The Englishman, who has more aluminum than we do, is building a wooden machine, and with a speed which he now increases again." Professor Willy Messerschmitt sat silently through much of Göring's tirade. His company produced the Bf-109 fighter and the Bf-110 heavy fighter. Both were all-metal designs. Neither could catch a mosquito at altitude. Goering turned directly to Messerschmitt. "You are supposed to be the greatest aircraft designer in Germany," he said, with barely disguised sarcasm. "Tell me why you cannot build a wooden aircraft capable of the performance we demand." Messerschmitt had no adequate answer. German aviation had committed entirely to metal construction. The entire industrial infrastructure, the engineering expertise, the manufacturing processes were all optimized for aluminum airframes. Converting to wood construction would require retraining workers, retooling factories, developing new adhesives, sourcing different materials. Germany lacked access to high-quality balsa wood from Ecuador. The German furniture industry possessed different skills than British piano makers. The adhesive technology that made British wooden aircraft possible simply did not exist in Germany. But Goering wanted a German mosquito, and what Goering wanted, the aviation industry had to provide. Erhard Milch, Reich Minister of Aviation, had already decided that Focke-Wulf would lead this effort. Kurt Tank, chief designer at Focke-Wulf, had begun preliminary work on a wooden night fighter in late 1942. The project would receive top priority, unlimited resources, and a name deliberately chosen to invoke the British original. The Germans would call it the Mosquito. The Focke-Wulf FW-154 Mosquito represented German engineering attempting to replicate British empirical success. Tank proposed an aircraft superficially similar to the Mosquito. Twin engines, wooden construction, 2 crew members, heavy armament for night fighting. The specifications called for speeds of 440 miles per hour, a ceiling of 37,000 feet, and a range of 1,000 miles. If achieved, these numbers would match or exceed Mosquito performance. The design progressed rapidly through late 1942 and early 1943. Tank initially selected the Junkers Jumo 211 engine for early prototypes, a liquid-cooled inline engine producing 1,300 to 1,500 horsepower, depending on variant. However, the intended production engine was the more powerful Junkers Jumo 213, capable of 1,750 horsepower. The airframe would use wooden construction with strategic metal reinforcements. A special phenolic resin called Technophil, manufactured by Goldschmidt Company in Wuppertal, would bond the wooden components. The cockpit would be pressurized, a feature the Mosquito lacked. Armament would include 2 30mm Mk108 cannons and 2 20mm MG151 cannons, firepower exceeding any British night fighter. On July 1, 1943, the first prototype took flight from Langenhagen Airfield. The aircraft bore the designation V1 and carried the identification code T+FE. Test pilot Hans Zander likely flew this initial flight, though some sources credit Kurt Tank himself. The flight lasted 40 minutes and showed considerable promise. Tank reported excellent handling and impressive speed in subsequent test flights. Follow-on prototypes confirmed the initial promise. During competitive trials at Rechlin Airfield, the TA-154 outflew both the Heinkel He 219 and the Junkers Ju 388. The lightly loaded prototypes, without full armament and radar equipment, reached nearly 440 miles per hour in level flight. This impressive figure exceeded German night fighter performance, though production aircraft with operational equipment would prove considerably slower. German aviation officials celebrated the achievement. Finally, they believed, an answer to the British Mosquito. Production plans called for 37 aircraft by May 1944, scaling to 250 per month by November. Factories in Poznan prepared for mass production operations. The Luftwaffe designated units to receive the new night fighter. Everything seemed to be on track. Then reality intervened unexpectedly. The Jumo 213 engines never arrived in required quantities. Junkers factories struggled with serious production problems. Engines allocated to the TA-154 were diverted to other programs desperately needing them. By spring 1944, only a handful of prototypes existed, all fitted with the lower-powered Jumo 211 engines that significantly reduced performance below specifications. The airframe itself revealed unexpected problems. The wooden wing structure proved heavier than calculated. Additional strengthening was required, adding weight that degraded speed and climb rate significantly. The landing gear components, originally engineered for a lighter aircraft, simply couldn't handle the actual weight once the prototype sat on the tarmac. The structure required substantial reinforcement work. But weight distribution problems weren't even the biggest threat looming over the entire project. Behind closed doors in Berlin, bureaucratic warfare was tearing the program apart from within. Ernst Heinkel was making noise everywhere, pushing hard for his He-219 night fighter design. He had powerful allies listening. Luftwaffe commanders, particularly those leading the night fighter squadrons, had their own preference. They liked what Heinkel was offering: superior radar systems and better crew visibility in the He-219. That was a real advantage they could measure and feel. Erhard Milch was fighting tooth and nail to keep the project alive, but the opposition was mounting. Skeptics within the government were asking uncomfortable questions. Did Germany even need another night fighter? Maybe all this effort was pointless duplication. Precious resources might accomplish far more if redirected toward jet fighter development. The Me-260U seemed to represent the true future. Kurt Tank found himself constantly defending his creation, having to justify every design choice to critics who wanted it cancelled. Internal disputes kept piling on, each one eating away at political support. Then, on May 29, 1943, everything changed in a single terrible night. Royal Air Force bombers came in waves. Their targets were carefully selected. One lay in the Posen province, where production of the aircraft was just beginning to ramp up. But the bombers had another target in mind that night, one far more critical than any airfield or assembly plant. They struck Wuppertal with overwhelming force. This industrial town held something irreplaceable: the Goldsmith Company's factory, and more importantly, it held something far more valuable to the project. This was the only manufacturing facility in all of Germany capable of producing Tego film adhesive, the special bonding agent that held wooden aircraft together. The adhesive was doing work nothing else could match. The raid was nightmarish in scale. Over 700 aircraft descended on the city under darkness, dropping tons of bombs in a coordinated assault. The attack created an inferno that consumed the urban center. Thousands of people died in the firestorm. Entire city blocks vanished in flame and smoke. Among the factories reduced to rubble and ash was the Tego film production plant. Production stopped immediately. There would be no more of that adhesive, at least not from that facility. The immediate crisis demanded quick thinking. Engineers scrambled to find alternatives. Dynamite Nobel AG, based in Leverkusen, had a phenolic resin compound that had been used in other industrial applications. Perhaps it could substitute. The material was delivered to Focke-Wulf with official assurances it would perform adequately. The engineers crossed their fingers and kept working. What happened next was nightmarish. On June 28, 1944, a prototype took off for testing. Partway through the flight, the aircraft simply disintegrated. The wings separated, the fuselage came apart. The pilot and crew died in the resulting crash. Investigation teams examined the wreckage carefully. They found the answer in the wood structure itself. The substitute adhesive had undergone chemical reactions with the wooden airframe, corroding the wood fibers from within, systematically destroying the aircraft's structural integrity. By July 1944, 2 more aircraft that had been completed using the Dynamite Nobel substitute were ready for acceptance testing. One aircraft made it only minutes into the flight before its wings tore away mid-air. 3 additional crashes followed in rapid succession, each one telling the same terrible story. The replacement adhesive wasn't just weaker than the original Tego film. It was actively destructive, eating away at everything it was supposed to hold together. Kurt Tank made an immediate decision. Every aircraft in the program was grounded. Production halted completely. Engineers were sent scrambling to find any alternative that might work. The search was frantic and ultimately futile. No suitable adhesive existed anywhere within Germany's borders. Tego film had required specific chemical processes and materials that couldn't be replicated quickly or improvised. The factory that had made it was gone, destroyed by British bombers, the very aircraft this project was supposed to defend Germany against. The factory had been incinerated 1 year before production was scheduled to begin in earnest. On August 14, 1944, Tank formally ceased all production. By September 9, 1944, the Reich Aviation Ministry officially cancelled the entire program. Only about 50 production aircraft had been completed, and most of them had been built using the inadequate substitute adhesive. They were essentially flying time bombs. A handful of pre-production aircraft remained in serviceable condition. Several of these were assigned to night fighter units for evaluation purposes. Combat records hint at limited success against British bombers, but whenever these German aircraft encountered de Havilland Mosquitoes, the results were consistently humiliating. The irony was almost cruel in its completeness. Germany's attempt to replicate the Mosquito had collapsed because British bombers had destroyed the very factory producing the adhesive that was supposed to hold the German copy together. But the catastrophe went deeper than just one bombing raid. The TAR-154 failure exposed fundamental weaknesses in German aviation that would have doomed the project regardless of any British bombing campaign. Germany simply lacked access to the quality materials that made the Mosquito possible. Ecuadorian balsa wood, Canadian spruce, British birch. These were resources tied to the British Empire, completely out of reach for Germany. German substitutes for these materials were heavier and far less consistent in quality. British adhesive technology had evolved through years of experience with wooden racing aircraft and wooden airliners. That expertise created formulations that proved superior to anything Germans could produce. The casing glue used in British Mosquitoes performed flawlessly across all climates and operating conditions. German adhesives, originally developed for furniture and construction purposes, simply couldn't withstand the stresses generated by high-performance military aircraft. Beyond materials, there was a larger organizational problem. Germany lacked the industrial infrastructure needed to mass-produce wooden aircraft efficiently. British furniture factories had transitioned smoothly to Mosquito production because the fundamental skills transferred directly. Workers already understood woodworking, assembly methods, and quality standards. German furniture manufacturing had developed along different lines entirely, retraining those workers, adapting factory layouts, establishing new quality control procedures. All of this required time. Germany didn't have time. The Mosquito had been in continuous production since 1941. By the time Germany attempted to copy it in 1943, the British had already solved hundreds of manufacturing problems and trained tens of thousands of experienced workers. Germany was trying to accomplish in months what Britain had refined over multiple years. The larger strategic situation made everything exponentially worse. By 1944, Germany was facing critical shortages across every industrial category. Aluminum was scarce, certainly, but so was quality timber. Premium lumber was being diverted to military fortifications, defensive structures, and mine supports. Chemical plants capable of producing adhesives were focused on explosives and synthetic fuel production instead. Skilled workers who might have built wooden aircraft were being conscripted into higher priority military programs. The project was forced to compete for resources with jet fighter programs. Ongoing production of conventional fighters and desperate attempts to replace aircraft losses on multiple combat fronts. As the competition intensified, workforce quality suffered. Experienced craftsmen were replaced by conscripted labor and hastily trained replacements who had never done precision work. Kurt Tank was brilliant, genuinely talented as an aircraft designer, but he couldn't match Geoffrey de Havilland's decades of accumulated experience with wooden aircraft design and production. Engineers working on the project were learning as they designed, encountering problems that British designers had already faced and solved years earlier. Test pilots kept reporting handling issues that suggested the aircraft had fundamental aerodynamic problems. Factory quality control deteriorated as experienced supervisors were replaced by forced labor and barely trained replacements. Aircraft left assembly lines with construction defects that should never have passed inspection. The handful of aircraft that reached operational units performed far worse than anyone had hoped. The Jumo 211 engines provided insufficient power for the design. Top speed rarely climbed above 400 miles per hour, nowhere near Mosquito performance. Climb rate was inadequate for rapid interception. The wooden construction, which should have provided advantages, instead created maintenance nightmares in field conditions. Moisture damaged adhesive bonds. Temperature swings caused the wood to warp. Repairs demanded specialized skills and materials that frontline units simply didn't possess. Most operational aircraft were grounded within weeks due to maintenance problems that couldn't be resolved with available resources. Combat encounters with actual mosquitoes were deeply embarrassing. On March 16, 1945, a Luftwaffe engineering report documented engagements between these night fighters and British mosquitoes over northern Germany. Every single encounter told the same story. The mosquito outran the German aircraft. The German fighter, supposedly designed to intercept and destroy mosquitoes, couldn't catch them. The wooden construction that was supposed to deliver performance advantages instead added weight and maintenance problems without providing the speed needed to compete. By April 1945, the remaining aircraft were withdrawn from combat operations entirely. Some were relegated to training duties for pilots transitioning to jet fighters. Others were cannibalized for parts or simply abandoned at airfields as Allied forces advanced. The total production run, including prototypes, amounted to roughly 70 aircraft. Compare that figure to nearly 8,000 mosquitoes built by the Allies. The program had consumed resources, engineering talent, and factory capacity that Germany desperately needed elsewhere. The return on that massive investment was effectively zero. The stark contrast between these two aircraft revealed broader patterns in wartime technological competition. The Mosquito succeeded because it was designed specifically around the resources Britain actually possessed and the manufacturing capabilities Britain could actually achieve. Geoffrey de Havilland grasped this principle intuitively. He understood that Britain possessed skilled woodworkers, reliable adhesives, and access to quality materials. He engineered an aircraft that exploited precisely those advantages. Manufacturing was intentionally distributed across dozens of small facilities, which made production surprisingly resilient to bombing attacks. The design itself was deliberately straightforward, using proven construction methods scaled up from smaller aircraft. Everything about it reflected realistic constraints. The TAR-154 failed because engineers attempted to copy a design without truly understanding the industrial ecosystem that made that design possible. German engineers saw the Mosquito's performance and assumed they could simply replicate it by copying the visible characteristics. They overlooked the decades of accumulated experience, the underlying industrial infrastructure, the sophisticated material science, the trained workforce. They assumed wooden construction was simple because wood was a traditional material Germans knew. They discovered far too late that modern wooden aircraft required sophisticated engineering, specialized materials, and craftsmen who possessed skills rivaling any metal worker's expertise. The fundamental strategic blunder was assuming that mimicking an enemy's successful design would automatically produce equivalent results. This approach completely ignored the context surrounding Mosquito development. It ignored the strengths of the British aviation industry and Germany's specific weaknesses. Most critically, it diverted resources away from areas where German engineering genuinely held advantages. The Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter represented genuinely advanced technology where Germany actually led the world. Resources poured into the TAR-154 might have produced hundreds of additional jets. Hermann Göring's envy of the Mosquito led directly to one of the Luftwaffe's most expensive failures. His furious March 1943 reaction revealed more than frustration with British success. It exposed a fundamental misunderstanding of why that success occurred. Göring believed that superior German engineering should automatically overcome any British advantage. He couldn't accept that British empirical incremental development might produce superior results compared to German theoretical approaches. He demanded a German Mosquito without understanding the actual requirements needed to make the British Mosquito work. This pattern extended far beyond aircraft design. Nazi ideology consistently underestimated adversaries it considered racially or culturally inferior. The Mosquito demonstrated that British engineering was not merely competitive with German engineering. In certain specific domains, it was demonstrably superior. The aircraft succeeded through practical problem-solving, not theoretical elegance. It succeeded by leveraging existing industrial strengths rather than forcing industrial capabilities into predetermined ideological patterns. It succeeded through distributed production, using available skills rather than centralized manufacturing, requiring specialized resources. Germany's failure to copy the Mosquito mirrored its broader failure to match Allied industrial production across every category. By 1944, Allied factories outproduced German facilities in measurable terms. Aircraft, tanks, ships, trucks, artillery, ammunition, everything. Germany's response was attempting to match quantity with quality, developing technically sophisticated weapons that consumed resources Germany lacked. The result was smaller quantities of marginally superior equipment facing overwhelming quantities of adequate equipment. The Mosquito remained unreachable for Germany through war's end. These aircraft continued striking targets across Germany through April 1945. They conducted the final Royal Air Force bombing raid of the European War on May 2, 1945. Throughout the entire conflict, Mosquito loss rates stayed below 2%, the lowest of any Allied bomber type. The aircraft's versatility proved so valuable that production continued after the war ended. The last Mosquito rolled out of the factory in November 1950, 5 years after German surrender. Post-war analysis revealed just how thoroughly the Mosquito had dominated its German counterparts. In photo reconnaissance, no German aircraft could match its altitude, speed, or range. In night fighting, Mosquito night fighters achieved more kills against German aircraft than the Ta-154 achieved against British aircraft. In precision bombing, Mosquito bomber variants struck more targets with greater accuracy than any comparable German design. In every role where direct comparison was possible, the wooden aircraft outperformed metal German designs. Industrial statistics told their own story. Britain produced 7,181 Mosquitoes during the war. Germany produced approximately 70 Ta-154s. British Mosquito production employed distributed facilities and required only woodworking skills. German Ta-154 production concentrated in vulnerable factories requiring specialized adhesives that disappeared after May 1944. British Mosquito maintenance required basic tools and commonly available materials. German Ta-154 maintenance demanded specialized skills and increasingly scarce materials as the war continued grinding on. The human cost of the Mosquito's success appeared in German casualty statistics. Mosquito bombers disrupted German industrial production, destroyed factories, killed workers, forced population evacuation. Mosquito night fighters destroyed German bombers attacking Britain, preserving British civilian lives. Mosquito reconnaissance provided targeting intelligence that made Allied bombing increasingly effective. Every successful Mosquito mission represented German resources destroyed, German casualties inflicted, German plans disrupted. The aircraft's low loss rate meant experienced crews survived to fly hundreds of missions, accumulating expertise that made them progressively more effective. For the crews who flew Mosquitoes, the aircraft became legendary. Pilots praised its handling characteristics, its speed, its ability to bring them safely home despite damage. Navigators valued the heated cockpit, superior visibility, and range that enabled deep penetration missions into enemy territory. Ground crews appreciated the straightforward maintenance requirements, ease of repair, and reliability that kept aircraft operational. Post-war surveys found Mosquito crews expressed higher satisfaction with their aircraft than any other bomber type. They trusted the wooden wonder with their lives, and it consistently delivered. The legacy extended well beyond World War II. The Mosquito influenced post-war aircraft design in numerous ways. Its use of composite construction prefigured modern carbon fiber aircraft. Its multi-role versatility established patterns that continue in contemporary combat aircraft. Its emphasis on speed and altitude over defensive armament influenced jet bomber design philosophies. Lessons learned building wooden aircraft transferred meaningfully to modern composite materials that share many of wood's inherent advantages. The distributed production model demonstrated resilience that modern military planners continue studying. For Germany, the TR-154 failure became a teaching case in post-war engineering programs. Students learned how technological ambition without sufficient industrial capacity produces failure. They studied the importance of matching designs to resources actually available. They examined how strategic decisions made in desperation often waste more resources than they can serve. The TAR-154 appears in military history courses as a cautionary example of how copying enemy success without understanding underlying factors guarantees failure. The story of Hermann Göring's envy and Germany's failed attempt to copy the Mosquito illustrates a fundamental truth about wartime innovation. Technology alone never determines outcomes. Industrial capacity, resource availability, workforce skills, organizational structure all matter equally as much as engineering excellence. The Mosquito succeeded not because it was theoretically perfect, but because it was practically achievable within British capabilities. The TAR-154 failed not because German engineers lacked competence, but because they attempted to replicate something their industrial system simply could not support. The wooden wonder demonstrated that sometimes the best solution is the one that works with what you possess, not the one requiring what you lack. Geoffrey de Havilland understood this principle instinctively. He designed an aircraft using resources Britain genuinely possessed, optimized for production Britain could realistically achieve, suited to missions Britain actually needed. Hermann Göring never grasped this principle. He demanded an aircraft matching British performance without considering whether Germany possessed the industrial ecosystem capable of producing it. The result proved predictable. British Mosquitoes flew over 15,000 operational sorties. German Mosquito copies barely flew at all. By war's end, the Mosquito had become one of the most successful aircraft designs in history. 7,781 built, 42 variants developed, service with air forces of 17 nations, operations on every continent where combat occurred. The aircraft achieved this success through pragmatic engineering rather than theoretical perfection, through distributed production rather than concentrated manufacturing, through leveraging existing skills rather than requiring entirely new capabilities. The wooden wonder worked because everything, its design, production methods, and operational employment, aligned with what was actually possible. The TAR-154, by contrast, existed mostly as a collection of prototypes and incomplete airframes gathering dust in abandoned factories. It represented resources wasted, opportunities squandered, consequences of strategic decisions made from envy rather than rational analysis. Hermann Göring saw the Mosquito and turned green with envy. That envy drove Germany to attempt copying what it simply could not produce. Failure was inevitable from the moment Göring demanded a German Mosquito without first asking whether Germany possessed the actual capability to build one. The story ultimately wasn't about wood versus metal or British engineering versus German engineering. It was about understanding your genuine strengths and designing solutions that leverage them effectively. It was about recognizing that what succeeds for your enemy might not work for you. It was about accepting that sometimes the other side genuinely possesses superior solutions, and attempting to copy them without possessing the underlying capabilities guarantees failure. The Mosquito taught these lessons through success. The TAR-154 confirmed them through spectacular failure. Hermann Göring learned them far too late to matter.